My name is Wanda, and at 67, I still take pride in the cozy Pennsylvania home I've owned for 40 years. As a retired high school English teacher, I thought I'd seen it all, especially after raising my daughter Stephanie alone when my husband Thomas died unexpectedly. Family gatherings have grown increasingly tense since Stephanie married Richard 5 years ago. But nothing prepared me for that Mother's Day lunch when my own daughter raised her glass and shattered my heart with words I never thought I'd hear. If you're watching from somewhere comfortable, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned the most crushing public humiliation into my greatest comeback. I grew up in a small Pennsylvania town called Millfield, where most families lived modest lives with simple dreams. My parents worked at the local factory, saving every penny to make sure I could attend college, something neither of them had the privilege to do. Those early years taught me the value of hard work and appreciation for what you have, not what you wish you had. I met Thomas during my sophomore year at Penn State. He was studying engineering and worked evenings at the campus library where I had a part-time job. What began as friendly conversations over book returns blossomed into the deepest love I've ever known. Thomas wasn't wealthy, but he was kind, brilliant, and had a way of making me feel like the most important person in any room. We married right after graduation, in a small ceremony with just our closest family and friends. We bought our little house in Westbrook, a suburb of Philadelphia, and planned for a future filled with children and possibility. Thomas found work at an engineering firm while I started teaching English at Westbrook High School. Stephanie came along 2 years later, a perfect baby with Thomas's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. From the moment she entered our world, she became its center. Thomas would rush home from work to play with her, and I would spend evenings grading papers with her sleeping on my chest. Our life wasn't extravagant, but it was rich in the ways that mattered. We had family dinners every night, weekend picnics in the local park, and vacation road trips in our aging station wagon. Thomas was the type of father who never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. He built Stephanie a treehouse in our backyard that became her favorite place to read and dream. Everything changed on a crisp autumn morning when Stephanie was 8. Thomas kissed me goodbye as he left for work, complained of slight indigestion, and promised to pick up ice cream on his way home. By noon, I received the call that he had collapsed at his desk. A massive heart attack took him before the ambulance even arrived at the hospital. The months that followed were a blur of grief, confusion, and overwhelming responsibility. Suddenly, I was a 33-year-old widow with an 8-year-old daughter and a mortgage. The life insurance helped, but it wouldn't last forever. I had to be both mother and father to Stephanie, while navigating my own broken heart. I remember sitting at our kitchen table late at night, after Stephanie was asleep, surrounded by bills and budget worksheets, determined to keep our home and provide stability for my daughter. I took on extra classes and summer school teaching to make ends meet. Every decision I made was with Stephanie's future in mind. Despite our financial constraints, I made sure Stephanie had opportunities. I enrolled her in dance classes because she loved movement. I helped her with homework every night, knowing education was her path to security. I drove her to science camps and museum visits in our second-hand car, wanting to nurture her curious mind. As Stephanie grew into a teenager, she showed remarkable intelligence and ambition. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. I still remember her excitement when she was accepted into the advanced placement program at her high school. I was so proud watching her blossom, knowing that despite losing Thomas, she was thriving. College applications were a stressful time for both of us. Stephanie had set her sights on prestigious universities, and I worried about how we would afford them. I had been saving what I could in a college fund, but it wouldn't cover everything. When the acceptance letter from Cornell arrived with a partial scholarship, we both cried with joy. I took out a second mortgage on our home to cover the remainder, never telling Stephanie how much I was stretching our finances. Those college years were a mixture of pride and loneliness. Our home felt empty without her, but our weekly phone calls were filled with stories of her classes, new friends, and campus life. She was becoming her own person, independent and confident. Thomas would have been so proud. After Cornell, Stephanie moved to New York City for a position at a financial consulting firm. She visited less frequently as she climbed the corporate ladder, but I understood. She was building her career just as I had wanted for her. Our relationship remained close, if somewhat distant by necessity. Everything shifted when Stephanie met Richard at a business conference when she was 30. He was 10 years older, already established in investment banking with family money behind him. Their whirlwind romance moved quickly, and within a year they were engaged. I noticed subtle changes in Stephanie during that time. Her wardrobe became exclusively designer brands. Her calls became shorter, often interrupted by work emergencies or plans with Richard. When they visited, conversations revolved around property investments, luxury vacations, and social connections that meant nothing to me but everything in their world. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at a historic mansion with hundreds of guests I didn't know. Richard's family dominated the planning, and I felt like a spectator rather than the mother of the bride. Stephanie looked beautiful, but somehow different, as if she had stepped into another life where I was merely an accessory to her past. After the wedding, our relationship became increasingly strained. Stephanie and Richard bought a sprawling home in an exclusive neighborhood. My visits there made me uncomfortable, as if I might accidentally break something valuable or say something embarrassing. Richard was polite but distant, clearly viewing me as someone from a different social class. Mother's Day celebrations became particularly difficult. 2 years ago, Stephanie sent an expensive handbag instead of visiting. Last year, she arranged a brief brunch where she spent most of the time on her phone. Each occasion left me feeling more disconnected from the daughter I had raised. So when Stephanie called 3 weeks ago suggesting a Mother's Day lunch at Bellini's, one of Philadelphia's most upscale restaurants, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she was making an effort to reconnect. Maybe she realized how much our relationship had changed. I allowed myself to imagine a warm, intimate meal where we might bridge the growing gap between us. "It'll be special, Mum," she said. "You deserve to be celebrated." Those words played in my mind repeatedly as I anticipated the day, unaware of how differently special would manifest. The week leading up to Mother's Day was filled with anticipation and hope. Stephanie's phone call had come as a surprise on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had been organizing my bookshelf, a retirement activity that gave me simple pleasure, when my phone rang with her name lighting up the screen. "Mum," she said, her voice warmer than it had been in months. "I've been thinking about Mother's Day. I'd like to take you somewhere really nice this year." My heart lifted at her words. "That sounds lovely, dear. I've made reservations at Bellini's for Sunday at 1 o'clock. It's supposed to be amazing. Will that work for you?" Bellini's was a restaurant I had only read about in the local newspaper's dining section, the kind of place where celebrities were spotted when they came to Philadelphia, where a simple pasta dish cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. "Bellini's, Stephanie, that's too expensive," I protested gently. "Don't worry about that," she replied. "It's my treat. You deserve something special." After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair by the window, allowing myself to hope this gesture meant a turning point in our relationship. Perhaps Stephanie was finally seeing me again, not just as an obligation, but as her mother who had sacrificed everything for her. The next day, I withdrew $60 from my carefully managed savings account and took the bus downtown to Marshall's. I needed something new to wear for such an upscale restaurant. After 2 hours of searching, I found a navy blue dress with small pearl buttons that looked elegant without trying too hard. It was on clearance, which made the splurge feel less guilty. 3 days before Mother's Day, I visited Diane at Westbrook Hair Salon, where I went only for special occasions now that I was on a fixed income. Diane had been cutting my hair for 20 years and knew exactly how to style my silver locks to look their best. "Big plans this weekend?" she asked as she worked. "My daughter is taking me to Bellini's for Mother's Day," I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "Fancy. That's wonderful," Diane replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror with genuine happiness for me. Saturday night I couldn't sleep. I found myself pulling out old photo albums tracing Stephanie's growth from a gap-toothed first grader to a confident college graduate. There was a photo of her at 10, standing proudly beside the science project I had helped her finish at midnight. Another showed her at 16, dressed for prom, in a gown I had altered from a second-hand store to look custom-made. Then her college graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with achievement. When had things changed between us? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It was a slow drift, like continents separating imperceptibly, until one day you look up and realize there's an ocean between you. Mother's Day morning arrived with sunshine streaming through my bedroom curtains. I took extra time getting ready, applying light makeup, and even adding a spritz of the perfume Thomas had given me for our last anniversary together. I wanted to look my best to make Stephanie proud to introduce me as her mother. The bus ride downtown took 45 minutes. I could have called a rideshare, but those small extravagances weren't part of my budget. Besides, I enjoyed the independence of navigating public transportation, something Richard had once commented on with poorly disguised disdain. "You take the bus, Mrs. Thompson. I can't remember the last time I was on public transportation. Isn't it rather unpredictable?" I arrived at Bellini's 20 minutes early, my nervousness making me punctual to a fault. The restaurant facade was elegant limestone, with gold-lettered signage and immaculate windows revealing glimpses of crystal and white tablecloths within. The hostess looked momentarily surprised when I gave Stephanie's name for the reservation, but quickly recovered her professional demeanor. "Mrs. Crawford's party hasn't arrived yet, but I can seat you at the table." Mrs. Crawford. It still sounded strange to hear Stephanie referred to by Richard's surname, as if she had shed her connection to Thomas, along with our family name. The table was by a window overlooking a small courtyard garden, elegantly set with fine china and multiple gleaming utensils that made me suddenly conscious of my rusty formal dining etiquette. A waiter appeared immediately, offering water and bread with a flourish. "Would you care for a drink while you wait, madam?" "Just water is fine, thank you," I replied, not wanting to start ordering before Stephanie arrived. I checked my watch repeatedly as 1 o'clock came and went. At 1:20, I saw Stephanie's sleek silver luxury car pull up to the valet stand. She emerged looking stunning in a cream-colored designer dress, her hair perfectly styled jewelry catching the sunlight. Richard stepped out from the passenger side, immediately handing his keys to the attendant with barely a glance. My heart sank slightly at Richard's presence. I had hoped for time alone with Stephanie, but I reminded myself to be grateful for any opportunity to connect. What I didn't expect was the second car that pulled up behind theirs. An older couple emerged, the man in an expensive suit, the woman draped in what looked like designer clothes. With a jolt of recognition, I realized they were Richard's parents, Harold and Vivian Crawford. I had met them only twice before at the wedding, and at one strained Christmas dinner. Then a third car arrived, yielding another couple approximately my age, but dressed with the unmistakable polish of wealth. I didn't recognize them, but could guess they were friends of the Crawfords. My intimate Mother's Day lunch was transforming before my eyes into something entirely different. Stephanie spotted me through the window and waved her smile bright, but not reaching her eyes. As they entered the restaurant, I stood smoothing my dress nervously. "Mum!" Stephanie greeted me with air kisses near my cheeks, careful not to smudge her makeup. "You found the place all right?" "Yes, the bus stop's just 2 blocks away," I said. Richard winced visibly at the mention of public transportation. "You should have called a car service, Wanda. We would have covered it." Before I could respond, he was turning to introduce the unknown couple. "Wanda, meet James and Patricia Whitfield. James is my father's golf partner, and Patricia serves on the hospital board with my mother." The introductions continued with handshakes and polite smiles that didn't warm the eyes. Harold Crawford barely acknowledged me while Vivian gave me a once-over that made me acutely aware of every wrinkle in my clearance rack dress. "How quaint you look today, Wanda," Vivian said, in a tone that suggested quaint was not a compliment. As we all settled at the table, I realized it had been set for 8 people all along. This was never intended to be the intimate mother-daughter lunch I had imagined. I was simply one guest at a social gathering centered around the Crawfords. The conversation immediately turned to topics that excluded me. The country club's new golf course expansion, an upcoming charity gala with five-figure ticket prices, summer homes in the Hamptons being prepared for the season. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly invisible as champagne was ordered without consulting me. "Still in that little house in Westbrook Wonder?" Harold Crawford asked during a lull, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes," I replied simply. "It's home." He responded with a dismissive glance at Richard. "Quite a commute for these lunches." Patricia Whitfield leaned forward with exaggerated interest. "And what do you do with yourself these days since retirement?" She said the word as if it were a disease one catches rather than a life phase one earns. "I volunteer at the library twice a week, and I'm part of a book club," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady and proud. "I also mentor struggling readers at my old school." "How charitable," Vivian murmured, exchanging glances with Patricia. The waiter arrived with champagne, pouring generous amounts into everyone's flutes. I noticed my glass being filled last and less fully than the others, as if the server had absorbed the hierarchy at the table. As the bubbling liquid settled in our glasses, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into something orchestrated, a performance where everyone knew their lines except me. Stephanie kept checking her phone, barely making eye contact with me. Richard whispered something to his father that made the older man nod approvingly. The sick feeling in my stomach grew stronger. This wasn't a celebration of Mother's Day, but I couldn't have imagined what was coming next. The restaurant hummed with the cheerful noise of other families celebrating Mother's Day. All around us, I could see mothers being honored by their children, receiving flowers, opening cards, accepting heartfelt toasts. The contrast with my own experience became increasingly painful as our appetizers arrived and conversation continued to flow around me rather than include me. Stephanie had barely spoken directly to me since we sat down. She was animated when talking to the Whitfields about their recent trip to Monaco, laughing at Richard's jokes about common people at his office, but offering me only occasional tight smiles when our eyes happened to meet. As our main courses were being cleared, Richard clinked his knife against his champagne glass. The table fell silent, and he nodded to Stephanie with an anticipatory smile. My daughter stood smoothing her expensive dress and lifted her champagne flute. I felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps now would come the acknowledgement of Mother's Day, the real reason we were gathered. "I'd like to make a toast," Stephanie announced, her voice carrying slightly so that nearby tables could hear. She turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To the woman who fed me, raised me, and showed me exactly who I never want to be. A failure just like her." The words hit me like physical blows. My breath caught in my throat as the table erupted in laughter. Richard's parents throwing their heads back in apparent delight, the Whitfields chuckling politely, Richard himself smirking with satisfaction. Only I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just heard from my own daughter's lips. "I mean, really?" Stephanie continued, emboldened by the response. "What success is there in spending your life teaching other people's children for pennies? In living in the same tiny house for 40 years, in taking the bus at 67, because you never managed to afford a decent car?" Each question was a dagger. I felt my hands begin to tremble under the table as memories flooded back. Nights spent grading papers after Stephanie was asleep, skipping lunch to afford her dance lessons, postponing needed dental work to pay for her school trips. "Stephanie," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the continued chuckles around the table. She ignored me. And now she expects to keep holding on to that house sitting on valuable property that could be put to better use while the rest of us move forward with our lives. Richard placed his hand over Stephanie's free one, their wedding rings catching the light. "Tell her the plan, honey. That's what today is really about." Stephanie reached into her designer handbag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. "This is why we wanted to meet today, Mom. We've found a place for you." With numb fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a glossy brochure for Sunset Gardens Assisted Living Facility, along with admission paperwork partially filled out with my name and details. The facility looked institutional, despite the colorful photos with tiny apartments and scheduled activities for residents who could no longer care for themselves. I don't need assisted living, I said, my voice finding some strength in the shock. I'm completely independent. My health is excellent. Harold Crawford cleared his throat. The property values in Westbrook have tripled in the past decade, Wanda. That house is sitting on a gold mine, and Stephanie owns half of it since Thomas left it to both of you. My mind raced back to Thomas's will. He had indeed left the house jointly to Stephanie and me, with the understanding that it would provide security for both of us. Never had I imagined our daughter would use that as leverage to displace me. We've already got developers interested, Richard added, not bothering to hide his enthusiasm. Once we consolidate ownership, we can close within 30 days. The market's hot right now. You want to sell my home? The words came out hollow, disbelieving. Our home, Stephanie corrected. Dad left me half for a reason. And let's be honest, Mum, you can't maintain it anymore. The garden's overgrown, the paint is peeling. It's becoming an eyesore in a neighborhood that's trying to gentrify. I thought of my carefully tended flower beds that had won the Neighborhood Association's Garden Award just last summer. The fresh paint I had saved for months to pay a local handyman to apply 2 years ago. The kitchen I kept spotless in honor of Thomas's love of cooking. None of it mattered to these people sitting around me judging my life with cold eyes. The facility has everything you need. Stephanie continued her tone, suggesting she was doing me a favor. 3 meals a day, weekly housekeeping scheduled activities with people your own age. You'll be much happier. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The restaurant seemed to tilt slightly, conversations from nearby tables blending into unintelligible noise. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. And the best part, Richard added, raising his glass again, is that the proceeds from the house will cover the facility fees for years. You won't have to worry about money. The money from selling the home that Thomas and I bought, I said softly. The home where I raised you, Stephanie. For a fleeting moment, something crossed Stephanie's face, perhaps a glimmer of doubt or guilt. But Richard squeezed her hand, and it vanished. It's just a house, Mum. It's time to let go of the past. This is the practical solution. I looked around the table at these strangers who were deciding my fate as casually as they might discuss a business transaction. Even the Whitfields, who had no connection to me whatsoever, were nodding as if they had any right to an opinion about where I should live out my remaining years. When? I managed to ask. The facility has an opening for June 1st, Stephanie replied. We've already put down a deposit to hold the room. That gives you just over 2 weeks to pack what you want to keep. Richard has arranged for a service to handle the rest. 2 weeks. After 40 years in my home. 2 weeks to dismantle the only connection I still had to Thomas, to my life's work, to the memories embedded in every corner. I felt something shift inside me then. Beneath the hurt and shock, a different emotion began to rise, one I hadn't felt in years. Anger, not the flash of irritation that comes and goes, but a deep, smouldering rage built on decades of sacrifice, met with callous ingratitude. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing familiar features. When had she become this person? This cold, calculating woman who could dismiss 4 decades of maternal love and sacrifice with a champagne toast, mocking my life's choices. And then I remembered Thomas's words to me during a difficult time when Stephanie was a rebellious teenager. Don't react when you're wounded, Wanda. That's when we make our worst mistakes. Take a breath, find your strength, and then respond from a place of clarity. So I did exactly that. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin slightly, and I looked directly into Stephanie's eyes with what my former students used to call the look, the expression that could silence a rowdy classroom instantly. Stephanie's smug smile faltered, mid-sentence about storage options for my excess belongings. She suddenly stopped speaking. The table fell quiet as everyone noticed the shift in energy. Richard glanced between us, confused by the sudden tension. I hadn't said a word. I didn't need to. My eyes conveyed everything: disappointment, resolve, and a silent promise that this conversation was far from over. The silence at our table seemed to expand, becoming its own presence among us. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while his parents exchanged puzzled glances. The Whitfields suddenly became very interested in the remnants of dessert on their plates. With deliberate calm, I reached for my untouched champagne glass. My hand, which had been trembling moments before, was now perfectly steady. I raised the glass slowly, maintaining unwavering eye contact with my daughter. To the daughter who thinks this is the end of my story, I said, my voice quiet but clear. The simple statement hung in the air between us. Stephanie's confident smile disappeared completely, replaced by uncertainty. She hadn't expected resistance. She had anticipated tears, pleading, perhaps anger, emotional responses she could dismiss as irrational. My composed dignity was clearly not part of her script. "Mum," she began, but faltered when I gently set my glass down without drinking. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," I said, addressing the table but looking at no one in particular. I stood, placed my napkin beside my plate, and walked toward the restroom with measured steps. Inside the elegant bathroom, I gripped the marble counter and finally allowed myself to breathe. The woman in the mirror looked pale, but remarkably composed. Behind her eyes I could see a storm of emotions, but her exterior remained unbroken. I thought of Thomas, then remembering a night shortly after we learned of his heart condition. We had been sitting on our porch swing watching the sunset when he squeezed my hand and said, "If anything happens to me, Wanda, remember you're the strongest person I've ever known. Stronger than you realize." At the time, I had brushed off his words as loving exaggeration. Now, facing the betrayal of our only child, I needed that strength more than ever. My mind flashed through pivotal moments when I had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges the day after Thomas's funeral, when I had to explain to 8-year-old Stephanie that Daddy wasn't coming home. The night I sat calculating how to stretch my teacher's salary to cover both our mortgage and Stephanie's college tuition. The first day back in my classroom after my cancer scare, determined not to let my students down, despite my exhaustion from treatments. I had survived it all. I would survive this too. Taking a deep breath, I splashed cool water on my wrists, a trick Thomas had taught me for calming nerves. As I dried my hands, I made a decision. I would not return to that table to endure more humiliation. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms, not theirs. As I emerged from the restroom, I noticed a young waitress watching me with concern. She had been serving a nearby table and had clearly witnessed what had transpired. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked quietly when our paths crossed. "I will be," I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. She hesitated, then quickly pulled a small notepad from her apron pocket. "My name is Angela. My mum works with Seniors Advocacy." She scribbled a number and pressed it into my hand. "Call if you need anything. Anything at all." The small act of kindness from a stranger nearly broke my composure, but I managed a grateful nod before continuing toward the restaurant's entrance rather than back to our table. I could feel eyes on my back as I walked past the hostess stand and out the door. Let them wonder. Let them sit there with their expensive champagne and cruel plans. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. The afternoon sun felt harsh after the restaurant's dim lighting. I walked to the bus stop without looking back, clutching my purse and Angela's note. For 40 minutes I sat on the bus, staring out the window at a city that suddenly seemed alien to me. My phone buzzed several times with messages from Stephanie, but I left them unread. When I finally reached my stop, I walked the 3 blocks to my house, slowly seeing it through new eyes. The blue shutters Thomas and I had painted together the summer before Stephanie was born. The maple tree in the front yard, now tall and strong, that we had planted when she was 3. The porch swing where I had read hundreds of bedtime stories. My house, my home, the repository of 40 years of memories. And now, apparently, just a piece of real estate to be liquidated for profit. Inside, I closed the door behind me and finally allowed the tears to come. I slid down against the wall in my entryway and sobbed. For the daughter I thought I knew, for the cruel words that could never be unheard, for the uncertain future that loomed before me. I cried until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. Night fell, and still I sat there in the darkening house, wrapped in a grief different from but no less profound than what I had felt when Thomas died. Around midnight, I finally rose stiffly from the floor. I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of family meals. I sat at the table where I had helped Stephanie with homework, where Thomas and I had shared our morning coffee, where I now ate most of my meals alone. A strange calm settled over me as I sipped my tea. This was not the end of my story. Stephanie and Richard might think they had written the final chapter, but they were wrong. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would begin writing my response. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, passing Stephanie's old room, with its shelves still holding trophies and keepsakes she hadn't wanted in her new life. I changed out of my navy blue dress, carefully hanging it up, though I doubted I would ever want to wear it again. As I lay in bed, exhaustion finally claiming me, one clear thought emerged from the chaos of the day. They had underestimated me. It was a mistake they would soon regret. Monday morning arrived with the harsh clarity that often follows emotional devastation. I had slept fitfully, dreams filled with fragments of the previous day's humiliation, but I rose with the dawn determined to begin reclaiming control of my life. First, I needed counsel. Not just emotional support, but practical legal advice. After a simple breakfast I couldn't taste, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Eleanor Bradshaw's number. Eleanor had taught law courses at the community college while I taught English at the high school. We had served on education committees together and maintained a friendship, even after her retirement into private practice 5 years before mine. "Wanda, what a lovely surprise," Eleanor answered on the third ring. "How are you?" "I've been better," I replied honestly. "Eleanor, I need your professional advice. Do you have time to meet today?" Something in my voice must have conveyed the urgency, because she immediately rearranged her schedule. "Come to my office at 11. We'll have lunch delivered." Eleanor's law office occupied the first floor of a converted Victorian home not far from my house. The comfortable waiting room with its worn leather chairs and bookshelves felt worlds away from the sterile opulence of Bellini's. When Eleanor ushered me into her private office, she took one look at my face and closed the door firmly behind us. "Tell me everything," she said. For the next 40 minutes, I recounted the entire Mother's Day ambush, trying to maintain composure, but occasionally failing, as I described Stephanie's cruel toast and the nursing home admission papers. Eleanor listened without interruption, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. "So they want to sell your house, citing Stephanie's partial ownership through Thomas's will," she summarized when I finished. "Do you have a copy of the will?" "In my home office." I nodded. "I've kept all important documents." "Good. We'll need to review the exact language. Wills often contain protective clauses that aren't immediately obvious." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "What about financial resources? If we need to fight this legally, what are we working with?" I swallowed hard. This was the part that worried me most. "My teacher's pension, some modest savings. The house itself is paid off, but I don't have much liquid capital." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Before we worry about that, let's understand what we're dealing with. Are you comfortable with me reviewing Thomas's will and any related documents?" "Of course. You're the only person I trust with this." "Then let's have lunch delivered and make a plan." Over sandwiches, we discussed immediate next steps. Eleanor would come to my house that afternoon to review Thomas's will and other relevant documents. Meanwhile, I would contact my financial advisor to get a clear picture of my assets and options. "Don't respond to Stephanie yet," Eleanor advised as I prepared to leave. "Give yourself time to gather information and consider your position. Any communication now could be used against you if this becomes adversarial." "If," I raised an eyebrow. Eleanor smiled sadly. "Point taken. When this becomes adversarial." My next stop was the office of Martin Greenfield, the financial advisor who had helped me manage my modest investments since Thomas's death. Martin had known us both had helped set up Stephanie's college fund and had guided me through financial decisions as a widow with limited resources but long-term responsibilities. "This is unexpected but not insurmountable," Martin said after I explained my situation. He pulled up my financial records on his computer and turned the screen so I could see. "Your pension is secure. The investments we've made are conservative but have performed steadily. You're not wealthy by any measure, but you're not destitute either." He pointed to figures on the screen. "Your teacher's retirement account has grown more than you might realize. The small inheritance from your aunt that we invested in that index fund has nearly doubled. And most importantly, the house itself has indeed appreciated significantly." "So they're right about its value," I said quietly. "The property has value, yes, but that doesn't mean selling it is your only option." Martin leaned forward. "Wanda, there are other possibilities. Reverse mortgages, home equity lines, even renting portions of the property while maintaining residence. We have options if you want to stay." For the first time since the restaurant, I felt a small flicker of hope. "Thank you, Martin." "Don't thank me yet. We have work to do." He began printing documents and placing them in a folder. "Take these home, review them with your attorney, and Wanda, remember that financial decisions should serve your life goals, not someone else's." By late afternoon, Eleanor had joined me at my dining room table surrounded by papers. Thomas's will was open before us, along with property records, insurance documents, and the financial statements Martin had provided. "This is interesting," Eleanor said, pointing to a clause in Thomas's will. "The language here is specific about intent. He left half ownership to Stephanie, yes, but with the clear provision that it was to ensure your lifetime security in the home you shared." She flipped to another section. "And here, this stipulates that any sale of the property during your lifetime would require proceeds to be used first and foremost to secure equivalent housing arrangements for you with your explicit approval. So they can't force me into that nursing home. Not based on this will, no. Thomas was protecting you even then." Eleanor made a note. "There's also the matter of improvements and maintenance. Have you kept records of all the work you've done on the house since Thomas's death?" I nodded, retrieving a file from my office. "Every repair, renovation, and tax payment. I've maintained the property entirely on my own for nearly 30 years. This strengthens your position considerably. You've not only preserved but enhanced the assets Stephanie partially inherited." As evening approached, Eleanor gathered the documents we'd identified as most important. "I'll review these more thoroughly and draft a response strategy. In the meantime, have you checked your messages from Stephanie?" I hadn't. The thought of reading her words made my stomach clench. Reluctantly, I opened my phone to find 6 text messages and 3 missed calls. The texts progressed from irritation, "Where did you go?" to performative concern, "Are you okay? This is very irresponsible," to thinly veiled threats. If you can't even manage a simple lunch without drama, how can you possibly continue living independently? "Classic manipulation tactics," Eleanor observed, reading over my shoulder. "She's trying to use your departure as evidence that you're incapable of rational behavior." What should I do? Send one message. Keep it brief and factual. Something like, "I am home safely. I need time to consider the significant changes you've proposed. Please respect my space. I will contact you when I'm ready to discuss further." I typed the message, my finger hovering over the send button. Will this make things worse? It establishes boundaries and prevents them from claiming you're non-responsive or missing. That's important. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder gently. "This is just the beginning, Wanda, but you're not facing it alone." After Eleanor left, promising to return the next day with additional information, I sat on my porch swing as the evening settled around me. The same swing where Thomas and I had dreamed of our future, where I had rocked Stephanie through colicky nights, where I still read on pleasant evenings. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The text read, "This is Angela from the restaurant. Just checking if you're okay and if you need any help." My mum works with Elder Rights Coalition. The unexpected kindness brought fresh tears to my eyes. I saved the number and replied with thanks, accepting her offer to connect me with her mother. As darkness fell, I realized something important. While Stephanie had betrayed me, I was not without resources, both material and human. Eleanor, Martin, Angela and her mother, former colleagues and students, the community I had built over decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I allowed myself to feel the first stirrings of something beyond hurt and shock. Determination, resolve, and yes, a touch of righteous anger that would fuel the fight ahead. I reached for a notepad and began listing every person I could think of who might be part of my support network. By the time I finished, the page was nearly full. I was not alone, and I was not powerless. Before going to bed, I walked through each room of my house, touching familiar objects, remembering the stories they held. This was more than real estate. This was my life's repository, and I would not surrender it without a fight. The next 2 weeks unfolded with a purposefulness I hadn't felt in years. Each day brought new information, new allies, and an increasingly clear path forward. Angela's mother, Diane Rodriguez, turned out to be the director of Elder Rights Coalition, a non-profit organization that advocated for seniors facing housing discrimination and financial exploitation. She visited me the day after I met with Eleanor, bringing resources and contacts that would prove invaluable. "Unfortunately, what you're experiencing is not uncommon," Diane explained as we sat in my living room. "Adult children seeing their parents' assets as their inheritance before the parent is gone. The difference is that you have the clarity and resources to fight back." Diane connected me with a support group of seniors who had faced similar situations. Their stories both horrified and strengthened me. Some had capitulated to their children's demands and deeply regretted it. Others had found creative solutions that preserved their independence while accommodating changing needs. All emphasized the importance of maintaining control over one's own life decisions. Meanwhile, Eleanor's review of legal documents revealed more protections than I had realized. Not only was Thomas's will structured to ensure my housing security, but I discovered letters Stephanie had written years ago, explicitly acknowledging her understanding that I would live in the house for my lifetime. These letters, written after Thomas's death when she was in college, constituted a form of verbal contract that could be legally significant. "She was so different then," I told Eleanor as we reviewed the letters. "Grateful for the sacrifices we made, aware of what the house meant to me." "People change," Eleanor replied gently. "Money and status can be powerful influences." Martin's financial analysis provided further options. The house had indeed tripled in value, but that meant I had equity that could be leveraged in multiple ways without selling. Additionally, my pension and investments were healthier than I'd realized, giving me more flexibility than Stephanie and Richard had probably assumed. "They're counting on you being financially naive," Martin observed during our third meeting. "It's an unfortunately common assumption about teachers and women of your generation." But the most unexpected support came through Angela, whose friendship grew from our chance encounter. At 28, she was closer to Stephanie's age than mine, yet showed the empathy my own daughter lacked. She began checking on me regularly, sometimes bringing coffee or helping with small tasks around the house. "My grandmother raised me after my mum left," she explained one afternoon as she helped me organize documents. "When her health declined, my mum suddenly reappeared and tried to sell her house out from under her. That's how I got involved with my mother's organization." "What happened?" I asked. "My grandmother found her voice and her power. She's still in her home at 84 with support services that preserve her dignity." Angela smiled. "She's actually the one who suggested I give you my number that day. She says she recognized the look of someone being steamrolled by family." Through all these conversations and discoveries, Stephanie continued sending increasingly demanding messages. Richard called twice, his smooth banker's voice carrying thinly veiled threats about legal options and competency hearings if I continued to be difficult. I maintained Eleanor's recommended response, brief acknowledgements without engagement, documenting everything. 10 days after Mother's Day, I received an unexpected email from a former student, Jason Merritt. Jason had been in my AP English class 15 years ago, a brilliant writer who had gone on to law school. He was now a partner at a respected Philadelphia firm specializing in elder law and estate issues. Mrs. Thompson, his email began, I heard through mutual connections that you might be facing some challenges regarding your home. I've never forgotten how you fought for my scholarship applications when my own parents had given up. If there's any way I can assist you now, it would be my honor. The timing couldn't have been better. Eleanor, while knowledgeable, wasn't a specialist in this area. With my permission, she contacted Jason, and within days we had assembled a small but formidable legal team working pro bono on my behalf. Richard Crawford's firm has been trying to recruit me for years, Jason told me during our first meeting, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. They have no idea I'm representing you. The look on his face when he realizes will be worth the price of admission. As the second week drew to a close, we had developed a comprehensive strategy. Eleanor, Jason, and Diane had helped me prepare for every possible scenario. Martin had created financial models showing multiple pathways to security that didn't involve the nursing home. Angela and her grandmother had helped me work through the emotional aspects of confronting my daughter. Throughout this time, I maintained my normal routines as much as possible. I continued volunteering at the library, tending my garden and meeting with my book club. I wanted anyone watching to see a capable, active senior living independently, not a fragile woman who could be bullied into submission. On Thursday morning, exactly 17 days after the Mother's Day debacle, Stephanie sent a text that crossed the line from pressure to ultimatum. Mom, we've been more than patient. The nursing home needs confirmation by tomorrow, or they'll give your spot to someone else. Richard's father has connections with family court judges. If you force us to prove you're unable to make sound decisions, it will be much worse for you. We'll be at your house tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the paperwork. Please be reasonable. I forwarded the message to Eleanor and Jason, then called Angela, who came over immediately. Together we prepared the house for the confrontation I had been both dreading and preparing for. Not by packing or clearing out, as Stephanie might have expected, but by setting the stage for a different kind of meeting entirely. That night, I slept surprisingly well. The anxiety that had plagued me since Mother's Day had transformed into something else: readiness. I was no longer a victim caught unaware. I was prepared, supported, and standing on solid ground. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and bright. Angela arrived early, helping me arrange the living room as we had planned. Eleanor and Jason would arrive 15 minutes before Stephanie and Richard, along with Martin and Diane. My kitchen table held coffee and the lemon squares I had baked the night before, a touch of normality in what would be anything but a normal family visit. At 9:45, my support team arrived, each carrying materials we had prepared together. We reviewed our strategy one final time. Remember, Eleanor said, you set the tone. This is your home, your life, your terms. At precisely 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Stephanie's car in the driveway, along with a black luxury sedan I didn't recognize. Angela squeezed my hand reassuringly as I moved to answer the door. The moment had arrived. It was time to show my daughter that underestimating me had been her gravest mistake. I opened my front door to find not only Stephanie and Richard standing on my porch, but also a third person, a slim man in an expensive suit holding a leather portfolio. Richard's lawyer, no doubt. Mom, Stephanie began, her tone a practiced blend of concern and authority. I see you're ready for us. Good. We have the final paperwork for your transfer to Sunset Gardens. The familiar surroundings of my own home and the presence of my support team behind me gave me strength. I stood tall in the doorway, neither backing away nor immediately inviting them in. I'm ready for a conversation, I corrected calmly. Please come in. As they entered my living room, I watched their expressions shift from confident determination to confusion. Instead of a frail woman surrounded by half-packed boxes, they found a professionally arranged meeting setup. Eleanor and Jason sat at one end of my coffee table with documents neatly arranged. Martin stood by my fireplace with financial charts ready for presentation. Diane from Elder Rights Coalition was positioned near my favorite reading chair, which had been placed strategically at the head of the arrangement. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice sharp with surprise. "This is a discussion about my future," I replied, gesturing toward the sofa. "Please sit down." Stephanie's eyes narrowed as she recognized Eleanor from community functions years ago. "You've hired a lawyer, Mum, that's unnecessary and frankly wasteful." "Actually," Jason said, stepping forward with hand extended, "Mrs. Thompson has a legal team, Jason, Merritt, Carrington and Weiss." The effect of his firm's name on Richard was immediate and satisfying. Carrington and Weiss was one of Philadelphia's most prestigious firms, often opposing Richard's company in major cases. "Merritt." Richard's face paled slightly. "Our HR department has been trying to recruit you for years." "Yes, I believe I have several standing offers," Jason replied with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask his enjoyment of the moment. "Shall we begin?" The third man stepped forward, recovering his composure. "David Hargrove, counsel for the Crawfords." He placed his card on the table with a practiced flick of his wrist. Eleanor picked it up, examined it briefly, and placed her own card atop it. "Eleanor Bradshaw, primary counsel for Wanda Thompson." I moved to my reading chair, what Jason had jokingly called the power position during our preparation. "Thank you all for coming. I believe we have important matters to discuss regarding my home and my future care arrangements." Stephanie looked at me as if seeing a stranger. Gone was the timid mother she had expected to bully into submission. In my place sat a woman in command of her own narrative, surrounded by professionals clearly prepared for battle. "Before we begin," Jason said, "I'd like to establish some ground rules for our discussion." Richard's attorney interjected, "This was meant to be a family meeting to finalize arrangements already agreed upon." "Nothing has been agreed upon," I stated firmly. "My daughter presented a plan. Today I will present mine." For the next 20 minutes, my team methodically dismantled the assumptions and claims that had been made at the Mother's Day lunch. Eleanor reviewed the legal protections in Thomas's will. Martin presented financial analyses showing multiple viable alternatives to selling my home. Diane outlined the legal protections against forced relocation of seniors, complete with case precedents. Throughout this presentation, Stephanie's expression shifted from annoyed to concerned. Richard grew increasingly agitated, whispering frantically with his attorney. When Jason revealed my collection of Stephanie's text messages and their potentially coercive nature, Richard finally interrupted. "This is absurd. We're trying to help Wanda, not harm her. The nursing facility is excellent." "A facility I neither need nor want," I replied, "and one that would be funded by liquidating my primary asset against my wishes." "Your wishes aren't the only consideration," Stephanie countered, finding her voice again. "Dad left me half the house for a reason." I leaned forward slightly. "Yes, he did. And Jason will now explain that reason as documented in your father's will and subsequent correspondence." Jason opened a folder containing copies of Thomas's will with key sections highlighted. Thomas Thompson's will includes specific language regarding the purpose of Stephanie's partial ownership. It was explicitly structured to ensure Mrs. Thompson's lifetime security in the family home, not to enable its sale against her wishes. He turned to another document. "We also have letters written by Stephanie after her father's death, acknowledging this understanding and promising to honor her father's wishes regarding her mother's continued residence in this home." Stephanie's face flushed. "Letters from when I was barely 20, before I understood the financial implications. Before you married into wealth and decided your mother's modest home was an embarrassment." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Richard's lawyer intervened smoothly. "Emotional arguments aside, the property rights are clear. Stephanie owns 50% of this house and has the legal right to petition for partition." "She does," Eleanor acknowledged. "And we would counter with evidence of verbal contract, undue influence, and potential elder abuse, all of which would be of significant interest to the family court judges with whom Mr. Crawford Sr. allegedly has connections." At the mention of elder abuse, Richard paled visibly. His company's reputation was built on ethical investment practices. Even the suggestion of involvement in elder financial exploitation could be damaging. Additionally, Diane added, the Elder Rights Coalition would be very interested in publicizing a case where a wealthy investment banker and his wife attempt to force an independent retired teacher into an unnecessary care facility against her will to profit from her home. Richard pulled Stephanie aside, whispering urgently. His lawyer joined them in a huddled conversation while my team waited patiently. I caught Angela's supportive smile from where she sat quietly documenting the meeting. When they returned to their seats, Richard's demeanor had noticeably changed. Perhaps we've approached this too aggressively. What exactly are you proposing, Wanda? This was the opening we had prepared for. Martin stepped forward with a presentation board showing 3 options. Mrs. Thompson is willing to consider selling the property under the following conditions, he explained. First, the house would be professionally appraised and listed at fair market value, not in a rushed private sale. Second, Mrs. Thompson would retain a 2-year leaseback at nominal rent, giving her time to properly transition. Third, her portion of the proceeds would be placed in a trust she controls for her future housing and care needs. I added, I've also decided to use part of my proceeds to help fund a housing cooperative for retired teachers that's being developed near the community college, a place where educators can maintain independence while sharing resources. A project that will be named in honor of Thomas Thompson, Jason noted, with appropriate recognition of the contribution. Stephanie looked stunned. You've planned all this in just 2 weeks? I've had excellent help, I replied, glancing around at my team. And considerable motivation. Richard and his lawyer conferred again briefly before Richard addressed me directly. Your terms seem reasonable from a business perspective. We'll need to review the details, of course. Of course, I agreed. Eleanor and Jason will work with Mr. Hargrove on the formal agreement. As the legal professionals began discussing specifics, I turned to Stephanie. Would you help me make coffee for everyone? She followed me to the kitchen wordlessly. As I filled the coffee maker, I could feel her watching me, reassessing the mother she thought she knew so well. Why didn't you just tell us you had another plan? She finally asked. Why all this theatre? I measured coffee grounds carefully before responding. Would you have listened? At what point in the past few years have you actually heard anything I've said about my own life and wishes? She had no answer to that. And it wasn't theatre, Stephanie. It was necessary preparation against what felt very much like an ambush. I turned to face her fully. You humiliated me on Mother's Day. You mocked my life's work. You called me a failure. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Richard thought it would be easier if you felt you had no choice. Richard thought wrong, I said simply, and you should have known better. As the coffee began to brew, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma, I added more gently, this isn't just about the house, Stephanie. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I am still a person with agency and dignity, not a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. I do respect you, she protested weakly. Your actions suggest otherwise. I began arranging cups on a tray. The relationship between us has been damaged, Stephanie. Repairing it will take time and genuine effort if it can be repaired at all. What does that mean? It means that today we'll negotiate a fair agreement about the house. But rebuilding trust between us is a separate matter entirely. I handed her the cream and sugar. That will depend on your choices going forward. She looked startled, as if it hadn't occurred to her that our relationship hung in the balance. Before she could respond, Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway. The attorneys think they have a framework, he announced, his businessman's efficiency reasserting itself. We should rejoin them. As Stephanie moved to follow him, I gently touched her arm. One more thing. The nursing home admission you arranged, please cancel it today. Someone who actually needs that level of care should have the spot. The negotiations continued for another hour, resulting in a framework agreement that protected my interests while allowing for the eventual sale of the house. Richard and Stephanie left with their attorney subdued, but apparently satisfied with the compromise solution. As my support team prepared to leave as well, I thanked each of them for their extraordinary help. When only Angela remained, I finally allowed myself to sit down, suddenly exhausted. "You were amazing," she said, bringing me a fresh cup of tea. "Absolutely fierce." I smiled tiredly. "I don't feel fierce. I feel relieved and sad." "The sad part is normal," she assured me. "You're grieving what you thought your relationship with your daughter was. But the relief—" Her eyes sparkled. "That's the feeling of reclaiming your power." As the afternoon sunlight filtered through my living room windows, illuminating the home I would eventually leave, but on my own terms, I realized she was right. This wasn't the end of my story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write myself. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment, arranging books on the built-in shelves that had been one of my requirements when selecting the unit. The large window overlooked a central courtyard garden, where several of my fellow residents were enjoying the crisp autumn air. A mug of tea steamed on the small table beside me, next to a stack of thank you cards I was writing to everyone who had helped with my move. The Thomas Thompson Teachers' Residence had become reality faster than any of us had anticipated. When word spread about the project, donations and support poured in from former students, colleagues, and community members. What had started as a theoretical possibility became a beautiful reality, a cooperative living community for retired educators that balanced independence with community support. My house had sold for significantly more than Stephanie and Richard had estimated, partly due to Martin insisting on proper marketing and multiple offers. My share of the proceeds, combined with my pension and investments, ensured I would have financial security for the rest of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me that by fighting their plan, I had actually ended up with more financial stability than their arrangement would have provided. The doorbell chimed softly. I wasn't expecting visitors, but impromptu drop-ins were one of the joys of community living. I opened the door to find Stephanie standing there holding a small plant. "Hi, Mum," she said tentatively. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting. Thought I'd see how you're settling in." Our relationship remained complicated. The immediate aftermath of our confrontation had been strained with communication limited to necessary discussions about the house sale and my move. But over the past few months, small changes had appeared in Stephanie's approach. Less presumption, more questions about my preferences, actual listening when I spoke. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I just made tea." She entered slowly, taking in the apartment with curious eyes. It was smaller than my house, certainly, but thoughtfully designed with wide doorways, accessible features, and plenty of natural light. Most importantly, it reflected my taste and needs, not someone else's idea of what was appropriate for me. "It's lovely," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Much nicer than I expected." I chose to overlook the backhanded compliment. The architects consulted with future residents during the design process. We had input on everything from kitchen layouts to lighting. "And this is all teachers living here?" "Mostly. Some retired administrators, counselors, librarians, anyone who served in education." I poured her tea into my second-best mug. The best ones were reserved for true friends. Some of us knew each other before, others are new connections. She wandered to my window, looking down at the courtyard. "Is that Mrs. Hernandez from the middle school?" "Yes, she leads the gardening committee. And that's Mr. Franklin, who taught physics for 40 years. He organizes our weekly science discussions." "It seems active." "It is. We have lectures, book groups, volunteer projects. Next month we're starting a tutoring program for neighborhood children." I sat in my favorite chair, the one I'd brought from my old living room. "It's a community, Stephanie, not a warehouse for old people." She winced slightly at my phrasing. "Good. Some barbs needed to be felt." "Richard and I are having problems," she said, suddenly changing the subject. "His company is struggling. Some bad investments clients pulling out." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, meaning it despite everything. Unhappiness served no one. "He's different when things aren't going well. Less confident. She fiddled with her teacup. More like the man who needed to mock his mother-in-law to feel powerful. The observation surprised me with its self-awareness. People reveal themselves in difficult times. Like you did, she said quietly. When we tried to force you into that nursing home, you revealed yourself as much stronger than we thought. I sipped my tea, letting the comment settle between us. I've always been strong, Stephanie. You just stopped seeing me clearly somewhere along the way. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about what he would think of everything that happened. He would have been deeply disappointed, I said honestly. But he also believed in redemption, in the possibility of change. Do you, she asked, vulnerability clear in her voice, believe in my possibility to change? I considered the question carefully. The hurt she had inflicted was still raw in many ways. The casual cruelty of her Mother's Day toast still echoed in quiet moments. But I also remembered the little girl who had once written in a school essay that her mother was her hero for working so hard to make sure we have everything we need, even when it's difficult. I believe people can change when they truly want to, I finally answered. When they recognize their mistakes and take responsibility for making amends, not just with words, but with consistent actions over time. She nodded slowly. That seems fair. We talked for another hour, mostly about neutral topics. Her work projects, my volunteer activities with the library literacy program, mutual acquaintances from the old neighborhood. As she prepared to leave, she paused by my door. There's a dinner next month, a fundraiser for literacy programs. Would you consider attending as my guest? Her voice held an uncertainty I hadn't heard since she was a teenager asking to borrow the car. No pressure, just if you'd like to. It was a small olive branch offered without presumption. I'll think about it, I promised. After she left, I returned to arranging my books, thinking about the complex nature of forgiveness and reconciliation. Stephanie had hurt me deeply, but she was still my daughter. The path forward wasn't about forgetting the pain she had caused, but about establishing new boundaries and expectations for whatever relationship might be possible. A knock at my door interrupted my reflections. I opened it to find Angela carrying a basket of freshly baked muffins. In the months since our chance meeting, she had become a regular visitor and dear friend. Thought you might need these after moving day, she said, entering with the comfortable familiarity of someone truly welcome. Blueberry, my grandmother's recipe. Angela's grandmother had also moved into the community, taking an apartment on the first floor. She had become something of a surrogate mother to me, offering the wisdom and warmth of shared experience that Stephanie couldn't provide. You just missed Stephanie, I told Angela as we settled at my small dining table. How did that go? She asked, concern evident in her expression. Better than previous visits. There's a long road ahead if we're to rebuild anything meaningful. I broke a muffin in half, savoring its warm aroma. But that's not my primary focus anymore. No. I gestured to the apartment around us, to the community visible through my window, to the new life I had created from the ashes of betrayal. This is the relationships I'm building here, the purpose I've found in helping create this place, the future I'm writing for myself. Angela smiled. Speaking of which, aren't you giving a talk to the community tonight? Yes, about resilience in later life. I laughed softly. Apparently, I've become something of an expert on the subject. That evening, I stood before a gathering of my fellow residents in our community room. As I shared my journey from that devastating Mother's Day to the present moment of newfound purpose and community, I noticed a figure slipping quietly into the back of the room. Stephanie had returned, standing uncertainly by the door, listening as I described the strength I had discovered in myself and the support I had found in unexpected places. Our eyes met briefly across the room. I didn't acknowledge her presence explicitly, but I didn't ask her to leave either. Perhaps listening was the first step in her own journey toward understanding. As I concluded my talk, I offered the wisdom that had become my guiding principle. To anyone who thinks your story is over, because someone else wrote the chapter, remember you always hold the pen for the next page. Age doesn't diminish our right to author our own lives. It simply gives us more experience to draw upon when facing life's challenges. The applause was warm and appreciative, coming from people who truly understood the value of self-determination at every stage of life. As residents came forward to share their own stories and reflections, I noticed Stephanie slip out quietly, but not before I caught a glimpse of thoughtfulness on her face that hadn't been there before. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in my new home that truly felt like mine, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The pain of betrayal remained a scar that would never completely fade. But it no longer defined my days or limited my possibilities. Instead, it had become the catalyst for creating something new and beautiful, not just this community space, but a renewed sense of my own worth and capabilities. Thomas had been right all those years ago. I was stronger than I knew. And now everyone else knew it too. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love when they tried to control your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most important boundaries we set are with the people closest to us. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your story is always yours to write, no matter what chapter you're on.